If you've been following the quiet storm inside Buckingham Palace these past months, you already know the tension has been building. Kate's health struggles, the endless whispers about Charles's health, the careful choreography of every public appearance, and always, Camilla standing just a little too close to the center of power. But no one expected the smallest princess in the room to be the one who finally said enough. It happened behind closed doors at Windsor, a private family gathering that was supposed to be nothing more than a quiet afternoon. No cameras, no press, just the king, the queen, the Waleses, and the three children. What began as polite conversation turned, according to multiple palace sources speaking on condition of anonymity, into the most explosive confrontation a royal family has seen since the days of Diana. Princess Charlotte, now 11 and already carrying herself with a quiet steel that has long reminded older courtiers of her late grandmother, had been watching how Camilla spoke to her mother. Watching the subtle corrections, the lightly veiled suggestions, the way certain decisions about the children's public life seemed to drift toward Clarence's house rather than Kensington Palace. And on this particular afternoon, something inside the young princess snapped. Witnesses described the moment with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Charlotte stood up from her chair. Not dramatically, not theatrically, just stood. The room fell silent the way rooms do when a child who is normally soft-spoken decides to speak with absolute clarity. She looked directly at Camilla and delivered what one senior aide later called the ultimatum that froze the entire conversation. The exact words, pieced together from those present, were calm, precise, and devastating. You will never speak to my mother that way again, and you will never decide what is best for us. That is not your place. It never was, and it never will be. The silence that followed was described as physical. King Charles is said to have gone completely still. Kate's eyes filled, but she did not interrupt. William's jaw tightened. And Camilla, for the first time in years, had no ready reply. What made the moment so powerful was not shouting or tears. It was the fact that an 11-year-old girl had just reminded the most powerful woman in the royal household of a truth the institution has tried very hard to soft-pedal. Bloodline, legacy, and loyalty still matter more than titles earned by marriage. Insiders say Charlotte did not stop there. She continued, voice steady, laying out the boundaries with a kind of clarity that left the adults in the room looking at one another as if they had suddenly remembered who the future actually belongs to. She spoke of her mother, of the quiet strength Kate has shown through illness and scrutiny, of the way Camilla's suggestions had begun to feel like instructions, of the subtle attempts to shape the children's image in ways that serve the current reign rather than the next one. And then she delivered the line that palace staff are still repeating in hushed tones. My grandmother was a queen. My father will be king. And I will never allow anyone to treat this family as if they are guests in their own house. The weight of those words hung in the air like a physical presence, because everyone in that room understood exactly what Charlotte was referencing. The long shadow of Diana, the complicated history, the careful public rehabilitation of Camilla that has always lived uneasily alongside the memory of the people's princess. An 11-year-old had just dragged that unspoken tension into the light and refused to look away. Sources close to the Wales household say William and Kate did not scold their daughter afterward. They did not rush to smooth things over. Instead, in the hours that followed, a quiet shift occurred. Conversations that had previously been routed through certain channels suddenly stopped. Decisions about the children's schedules that once invited input from the Queen's side were firmly reclaimed. And Camilla, according to those who have observed her closely since that day, has been markedly more careful in her interactions with the Wales children. This was not a child's tantrum. This was a declaration of loyalty and protection delivered by the one person in the family who still sees the world in clear moral lines rather than political calculations. Charlotte has always been described as the most observant of the three siblings. The one who notices tone, the one who remembers, the one who, even at a young age, understands that kindness and respect are not the same thing as submission. Palace veterans are calling it the moment the next generation announce itself, not with a speech from a balcony or a carefully staged photograph, but with a quiet, unshakable refusal to allow the past to be rewritten at the expense of the people they love. And the consequences are already rippling outward. Staff who once walked a careful line between Kensington and Clarence's house have noticed the temperature change. Certain invitations have been declined. Certain joint appearances have been quietly postponed. The public may not yet see the full picture, but those inside the machine feel it every day. What makes this story so gripping is not simply that a child stood up to a queen. It is that she did so with such moral clarity that even the adults who have spent decades navigating royal power structures found themselves unable to dismiss her. There was no easy way to reframe the moment as youthful overstepping. The words were too precise, the timing too perfect, the loyalty too absolute. In the days that followed, Charlotte continued her normal life. School, riding, the small routines that keep young royals grounded. But something fundamental had shifted. The little girl who once curtsied carefully and smiled for the cameras had drawn a permanent boundary, and everyone who heard about it understood that the boundary would be defended. Camilla, for her part, has maintained her public composure. There have been no public comments, of course. There never are. But those who know her well describe a woman who has been forced to recalculate. The easy assumption that time and titles would eventually smooth every rough edge has been challenged by an 11-year-old who refuses to forget. This is a story the palace never wanted told, because it reveals something uncomfortable about power inside the royal family, that the future does not always wait politely for permission. Sometimes it stands up in a private room, looks the present in the eye, and says, clearly and forever, no further. And that, my friends, is exactly what Princess Charlotte did. The full fallout from this confrontation is still unfolding. The private conversations that followed, the way William and Kate have quietly reinforced their daughter's stance, the careful distance that has begun to appear in certain family dynamics. All of it points to a permanent change in the balance of influence at the highest levels of the monarchy. But the heart of the story remains that single, unshakable moment when an 11-year-old princess decided that protecting her mother and her family's dignity mattered more than royal protocol, more than hierarchy, more than the careful silence that has protected Camilla for so long. Charlotte's ultimatum was not loud. It did not need to be. It was final. And the palace is still learning how to live with the new reality she created. In the weeks that followed that private confrontation at Windsor, the shift became impossible to ignore for those who worked closest to the royal households. What began as a single, clear-eyed declaration from an 11-year-old girl has hardened into a new set of unspoken rules. Staff at Kensington Palace speak of a quiet but firm reclaiming of territory. Decisions that once invited polite consultation with the Queen's office are now handled exclusively within the Wales household. The children's public diary, their school arrangements, even the smaller details of how they appear at family events, all of it has been drawn closer to William and Kate's direct control. Sources familiar with the internal dynamics say Camilla has adapted with the practiced smoothness of someone who has survived far greater storms. There have been no dramatic scenes, no raised voices in corridors. Instead, a careful recalibration. The warm, grandmotherly gestures that once came easily in public have become more measured when the Wales children are present. The casual suggestions about what might work best for the family image have largely stopped. Those who observe her closely describe a woman who understands that the ground has moved beneath her feet, even if she will never publicly acknowledge the tremor. What makes Charlotte's stand so lasting is the way it has been quietly reinforced by her parents. William, according to those near him, did not treat the moment as an unfortunate outburst that needed smoothing over. He treated it as a statement of principle. In the days after the confrontation, he is said to have spoken privately with his daughter, not to correct her, but to make certain she understood the weight of what she had done and the support that would stand behind her. Kate, still recovering her full strength after the public battles of recent years, has been described as both protective and quietly proud. The bond between mother and daughter, already close, appears to have deepened into something even more resolute. Inside the wider family, the reactions have been more varied. King Charles is reported to have been deeply unsettled by the exchange. Those who know him well say he has always preferred harmony to confrontation, especially within the private walls of the family. The idea that his granddaughter felt compelled to draw such a sharp line against his wife has left him navigating an uncomfortable middle ground. He cannot dismiss Charlotte's words without appearing to side against his own son's family. Yet he also cannot fully embrace them without creating further distance with Camilla. The result, according to palace observers, has been a careful neutrality that only highlights how real the fracture has become. Beyond the immediate family, the story has begun to filter through the outer circles of the court in the way these things always do, through trusted aides, through long-serving staff who have seen generations of royal tension, through the quiet networks that still connect the old guard to the new. The consensus among many is that Charlotte did something the adults had been too careful or too compromised to do themselves. She named the imbalance. She refused a polite fiction that everything was settled and harmonious. And in doing so, she forced everyone else to confront it. There is a particular poignancy in the fact that it was Charlotte who delivered the ultimatum. Of the three Wales children, she has long been the one who most strongly evokes memories of Diana, not only in appearance, but in that combination of sensitivity and steel. Courtiers who served during the previous generation have remarked, almost in spite of themselves, that the young princess seems to carry an instinctive understanding of loyalty and injustice that feels inherited rather than taught. When she spoke that afternoon at Windsor, she was not simply defending her mother in the moment. She was defending a larger idea of what the family owes its own. The public, of course, has seen only the surface. The carefully managed appearances continue. The smile for the cameras remain in place. Yet those who study the body language of the royals with professional attention have begun to notice the subtle changes. The physical distance that sometimes appears between Camilla and the Wales children. The way Charlotte's gaze, when it lands on her step-grandmother in public, carries a composure that feels older than her years. The protective positioning of William and Kate whenever the generations gather. None of it is dramatic enough to make headlines on its own. Together, it forms a picture of a household that has quietly redrawn its internal boundaries. What remains most striking to those who heard the original account is the absolute finality of Charlotte's tone. There was no negotiation in her words, no opening for future discussion. She did not ask for better treatment or more consideration. She stated a permanent condition, this far and no further. In a family that has spent decades mastering the art of ambiguity and careful language, the clarity was almost shocking. An 11-year-old had spoken with the authority of someone who already understood that some lines, once drawn, cannot be erased without destroying the trust that holds everything together. In the months since, Charlotte has continued to grow into the role she seems destined for. She remains, by all accounts, a child who loves her horses, her siblings, and the ordinary rhythms of school life. Yet those who know her say there's a new steadiness in her, a quiet confidence that comes from having spoken a difficult truth and being backed by the people who matter most. The ultimatum did not turn her into a different person. It simply revealed the strength that was already there. For Camilla, the long-term consequences are still unfolding. The carefully constructed position she has occupied, queen, partner, public figure who survived decades of hostility, now exists alongside the knowledge that the next generation has set its own terms. She retains the title, the public role, the place beside the king. What she no longer possesses is the assumption that influence over the Wales children would grow naturally with time. That door has been closed, and the person who closed it was not a rival courtier or political operator. It was a little girl who decided her mother's dignity was non-negotiable. The deeper meaning of the moment continues to resonate through the institution. In an era when the monarchy is constantly negotiating its relevance, its image, and its future, Charlotte's stand has served as a reminder that the real power of the family has never rested solely in titles or protocol. It has always rested in the fierce, sometimes uncomfortable loyalty that binds one generation to the next. By refusing to allow that loyalty to be diluted, the young princess did more than put Camilla in her place. She reasserted a principle older than any of the current players, that the heart of the monarchy is not the crown alone, but the people who carry its future. And so the story settles into its new shape. The palace is adjusted. The public appearances continue with their usual polish. But underneath the surface, the balance has permanently shifted. An 11-year-old princess looked at the most powerful woman in the royal household and spoke a truth that could not be walked back. In doing so, she protected her mother, strengthened her family's position, and announced, without ever raising her voice, that the next chapter of this ancient institution would be written on different terms. Charlotte's ultimatum was not the end of a conflict. It was the beginning of a new order. And everyone inside the palace walls now understands that the line she drew that day at Windsor will not be crossed again. Not now. Not ever. If this story has left you as stunned as it left the people who first heard it, share your thoughts below. Do you believe Charlotte's stand will shape the future of the monarchy for decades to come? The comments are open. And as always, stay tuned. Because in this family, the quietest moments often carry the loudest consequences.